Welcome back to our Playwriting 101 series with Julia Fisher, where today we're going to start talking about dialogue. Let's get started. Dialogue is obviously a huge part of writing your play, so today we're just going to focus on one part of dialogue, and that is how to ensure that each of your characters have their own unique voice. One of the pitfalls that a lot of playwrights fall into, myself included, is writing in a way that makes all of your characters sound the same. And it's easy to understand why, because we're writing it and we are one person. But your characters are all different people and they should all sound different, just like every person who talks has their own unique way of expressing themselves. The goal for this episode is that if you use these tips that I will give you, you should be able to pick a piece of dialogue from anywhere in your play and have someone know which character said it, just by the way that the sentence is constructed and the way that that character's voice is expressed on the page. So the first tool I'm going to give you to work with is the length of your sentences. Some people talk in really long run-on sentences, and some people talk in short, choppy sentences. Think about your character. Are they the type of person who are going to trail on and on and on and on? Or are they the character who's going to respond in short, quick, simple sentences? This obviously can be adjusted throughout your play. A character might speak in long sentences in one part of your play and short sentences in another, but think purposefully about how long your sentences are as your characters are talking. 2. Vocabulary. What kind of words does your character use? Do they use big fancy words? Do they use pretty simple words? Are they trying to impress people with their vocabulary? Are they trying to fit in with a certain group of people? Does their vocabulary change depending on what other characters are in the room with them? This also applies to swearing. An easy way to differentiate between your characters is to think about their different philosophies on swearing. Even if all of your characters do swear, the frequency of their swearing, the choice of words that they use, the way in which they use those words, will all depend on their own personality. So think about that as you're deciding when and how often to use different words in your play. Next, catchphrases. Do any of your characters have certain words or phrases that they use a lot? Those can be really interesting character techniques to see what a character is like by the way that they talk and what kind of phrases they use all the time. Or what about filler words? We all as people have our own different filler words that we use when we're speaking, whether it's like, or pauses, or just repeating your words. Those types of filler words, you don't want to use so much that it becomes annoying, but you can sneak those into your dialogue so that it feels a little more natural and it gives your characters a little more personality, depending on how they use filler words in front of what people. Next, how direct or indirect is your character when talking to other people? Do they come straight out and say how they feel about something? Or do they kind of beat around the bush? Maybe they're a little more passive-aggressive, hinting at what they're feeling or talking around what they're feeling instead of being able to say it straight out. And this also goes for different topics within each character. Maybe your character is able to talk really directly about one issue, but they're a little more sensitive about a different issue and kind of have to talk around that issue. That can also show us how your characters feel about different issues within your play. Next, you want to think about the style of your dialogue within your play. Is your dialogue flowery and poetic and full of imagery? Is it short and concise and simple? This can be a style that you choose throughout your whole play, but it can also be applied to each individual character. Maybe you have a character who speaks in a lot of imagery and poetry and repetition, and maybe you have a character who speaks a lot more simply. The next tool that I want you to think about is your punctuation. And here's one of my favorite secrets about playwriting. In playwriting, you don't have to follow the standard English rules of punctuation, even though I love punctuation rules. In your dialogue, you get to ignore that and use punctuation to show precisely what your character is saying and how they're saying it. If they're pausing a lot throughout their sentences, you can use commas or dashes to show that pausing. If they end their sentences up a lot, even if it's not actually a question, you can end it with a question mark to show your actor that they need to raise their voice at the end of their sentence. If they stop a lot in the middle of their sentences, you can put periods at all of those stops, even though it's not a full sentence, to show your actor that that's how they should be reciting those words. So you can play around with punctuation. They're great tools to use as a writer to show precisely to your actors and your audience how this character speaks. The last tool I'm going to give you to differentiate between your characters is to think about how they interact with pauses and silences and other characters speaking. Are they often interrupting other characters? Are they often trailing off in the middle of their sentences? Do they get lost in the middle of their ideas and just kind of stop their sentences short? Do they pause a lot in the middle of their sentences? Do they have a lot of silences in between their lines? This is going to lead directly into the next part of the episode, which is how to use dialogue typing tips to show your actors exactly what you want them to do with interruptions, with silences, with pauses, and things like that. So I'm just going to go over a few punctuation marks and a few stage directions that you can use to show your actors exactly what kind of a moment you're looking for. So our first piece of punctuation is the ellipses, or the ... This is to show that your character has kind of trailed off. So whether that's in the middle of their sentence, they start saying something, and then they change their mind and move on to something else. Or they're thinking of the right word to say. That pause is represented by an ellipses. This can also work at the end of a line if they just kind of get to the end of a sentence and they're not really sure what to say. You can have an ellipses there. Our next punctuation mark is the dash. A dash can be used to show that your character has been interrupted by someone. So if they start a sentence and their sentence is cut off because another character starts talking, you can end that first character sentence with a dash. Next, if you want your character to get interrupted but they keep talking, so you have a moment where both characters are talking at the same time, you can use a slash. And this is one of my favorite things to do. So you have your first character starts talking, and then once you want the second character to interrupt them, you can put a slash mark and then continue with that first character's line of dialogue until they stop talking. That slash mark tells the next actor that they need to start their line at that slash mark. So they will start their line of dialogue when the first character gets to that slash mark. So they will overlap for that second part of that line. If you have a large section of dialogue where two or more characters are talking at the same time, and it's more than just a little overlap, then what you can do is actually split your dialogue into two columns and put both characters' dialogue in those columns to show that the whole thing is being spoken at the same time. Next, I'm going to show you a few different stage directions that you can use to show your audience different moments that you want to show on stage. So first, we're going to talk about beats. The word beat can be used in a couple different ways in acting, but today we're going to talk about a beat in a stage direction. So this is if you ever see in parentheses the word beat or a beat. And what this means is that there's an actual beat moment, so like a heartbeat moment before a character starts talking or in the middle of a line. So I usually just think about it as like a drum beat or a heartbeat in that moment. So if your character's talking and then it says a beat, it would be like, I'm talking to you, and then I keep talking to you. It wasn't like I trailed off like I did with the ellipses earlier, but there was a beat, a pause in that moment. That can also happen before you start talking, so there's a beat and then you start talking. Next is the stage direction that says pause. A pause is generally longer than a beat. A beat is, again, just that moment, that heartbeat. A pause is a little bit longer, and it's usually up to the actors to determine how long is appropriate for that pause. Next is silence. Silence is generally longer than a pause. Silence on stage can mean up to or even longer than 20 or 30 seconds. This is when you really want an extended period of silence on stage, which can be really powerful when used in the appropriate moment. My favorite stage direction to use in these moments, though, is the stage direction that says, "a moment." And this gives the actors a little more freedom to kind of determine what that moment looks like. So by saying "a moment," it's a little more specific than pause or silence in that something happens here. Some sort of information or emotion is exchanged between your two characters in this silence or this pause. The stage direction, "a moment," is very specific that it's not just a silence or a pause here, but something is actually happening. Some moment is being shared between the characters on stage. And those are our dialogue tips for today. I hope this helps you create characters that have their own unique voices and also helps you have the tools to show your actors exactly how you want your characters to sound on stage. Thank you for watching this video. Please check out some of my other videos in this Playwriting 101 series. Have a wonderful day and happy writing!